Iran and Russia plan to isolate America with the US dollar, and they'll succeed. Iran and Russia are on a warpath to isolate America from the global economic stage. And they plan to do it by using the US dollar. Or, more accurately, by not using the US dollar. See what we mean, and how you can protect your investments amid the coming storm. Iran and Russia strike not one, but 6 oil deals. Russia and Iran need each other. On Wednesday, Nov. 1, the two countries agreed to collaborate on 6 separate strategic energy deals worth some $30 billion. These deals would be an economic boon for Tehran after years of sanctions that were only lifted in 2015 via the arguably contentious Iran nuclear deal. In the 2+ years since, Iran has only managed to secure one notable agreement, with French company Total, in July, worth $4.8 billion. But fortunately for Iran, Russia needs to diversify its global oil assets. Which brings us to Wednesday's agreement between Moscow and Tehran. Ultimately, that $30 billion deal will achieve a production plateau of 55 million metric tons of oil per year, Igor Sekin, chief executive of Russia's state-controlled Rosneft, said, according to the Financial Times that day. That's more oil than any nation produced in 2016, though Russia did produce the most crude last year for the first time ever. It outsold Saudi Arabia by 22 million metric tons. Russia's move into Iran, then, may be a strategic one, a power play meant to secure Moscow's top producer status into the future. But Russia and Iran's $30 billion deal also serves another purpose, one that Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei didn't shy away from advertising across international lines. Iran pressures Russia to ditch the dollar. After branding America as an enemy on Wednesday, Khamenei urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to sever ties with the US dollar. By ignoring the negative propaganda of the enemies that seek to weaken relations between countries, we can nullify US sanctions, using methods such as eliminating the dollar and replacing it with national currencies in transactions between 2 or more parties. Thus, isolate the Americans, Khamenei said, according to Economic Times. You need this precious metal in your portfolio, learn how to leverage this rare market anomaly before it's too late. The Supreme Leader's ominous suggestion didn't elicit public agreement from Putin, but the Russian leader did condemn U.S. President Donald Trump's unilateral stance on the Iran nuclear deal, that it was the worst deal ever negotiated. Putin said that Moscow opposes any unilateral change in the multilateral nuclear deal, the Washington Post reported on Wednesday. But Putin didn't go any further with his America bashing, yet. So it's safe to assume that Khamenei's suggestion this week was meant to be more of a public performance of sorts. To let American diplomats know that Russia and Iran will support one another should the United States one day nullify the Iran deal, and that they have the will and the means to disrupt America's leadership in the global economy. That's because a successful Russia-Iran dollar ditch would set in motion a domino effect that could see the greenback overtaken as the global standard in oil deals. A crushing blow to the U.S. economy. Here's how it could play out. If Iran and Russia give up the greenback, others will follow. Make no mistake, Iran and Russia are capable of starting a global movement away from the dollar. Right now, the petrodollar, the dollar-based currency standard for international oil deals, is the standard worldwide. It's been that way since former U.S. President Richard Nixon struck a deal in 1974 with Saudi Arabia, chief oil exporter to the world then and, for the most part, now. A move away from this standard, however, would invite other nations to follow suit, which would result in exactly the kind of isolation that Khamenei discussed this week. Iran is not the only nation considering this move at present. China is actively working to compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in yuan instead, which would make the standard oil currency petro-yuan. And the impact of replacing the petrodollar with petro-yuan overall would seriously injure the U.S. economy as a whole. Moving oil trade out of dollars into yuan will take right now between $600 billion and $800 billion worth of transactions out of the dollar, Carl Weinberg, chief economist and managing director at High Frequency Economics, told CNBC on Monday. This would mean a stronger demand for things in China, whether it's securities or whether it's goods and services. It is a growth plus for China, and that's why they want this to happen, he added. A growth plus for China, and a massive loss for America, that is. This scenario isn't far-fetched. Venezuela already switched over to Petro-Yuan on September 13th. Never miss a single update on oil and gas again. Get real-time alerts sent to your inbox, completely free, here. If Iran and Russia follow through with Khamenei's scheme, joining Venezuela's recent dollar ditch, then further support from China and even Saudi Arabia could follow close behind, excluding the US dollar from trillions in trade. And it all stems back to Washington's fraught relationship with Tehran. American oil companies will be left out in the cold. When it comes to playing hardball with Iran, the United States is quickly losing leverage. On Oct. 16, Monday Morning global energy strategist Dr. Kent Moores, a 35-year expert in global oil and gas policy and emerging market economic development, wrote about the deleterious future outlook of a re-sanctioned Tehran, particularly how it would affect average investors in the United States. Kent wrote that such a future would give OPEC greater ability to exceed their production cap without depressing overall price. We all see what happens whenever OPEC does that. Gas prices skyrocket and put a dent in our wallets. On top of that, Kent wrote, European energy majors and their continental sources of finance are now quite far along in negotiating deals to extract oil and gas in Iran, as well as for major liquefied natural gas (LNG) export contracts. This is to say that energy companies across the Atlantic would still pursue oil deals with Iran, regardless of America's stance toward the Middle Eastern nation, because they're already well underway. Indeed, those deals would continue, Kent wrote, with the European home governments of both companies and banks supporting the ventures. In turn, American businesses will be left out in the cold, or isolated, if you will, because they'll be missing out on global oil buy-in deals. Fortunately, the global energy balance is shifting. If the politicians in Washington allow short-sighted and fear-based domestic policy to sabotage the preeminence of the petrodollar, savvy investors can, and should, find lucrative energy opportunities outside of oil. Opportunities like this one. Utility companies spent $400 million to kill this. It can power your car, heat your home, and even run entire factories. This special fuel is harvested in most parts of the world, and there's enough to power the planet for 36,000 years. Yet DC lobbyists made $400 million preventing it from going mainstream. See why tech companies are investing millions in this fuel. Putin, in Iran for talks, offers support for nuclear deal. Tehran, Iran. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday strongly backed Iran and its nuclear deal with world powers, saying Moscow opposed any unilateral change to the accord after U.S. President Donald Trump refused to recertify it. Putin made the comments on a one-day trip to Tehran for trilateral talks between Azerbaijan, Iran and Russia, a meeting largely focused on improving road and rail links to the neighboring countries on the Caspian Sea. However, the nuclear deal loomed large as Putin met with both Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who easily won re-election this year after securing the atomic deal, and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has the final say on all state matters. We oppose any unilateral change in the multilateral nuclear deal, Putin said while meeting Khamenei, according to a statement from the Supreme Leader's office. We oppose linking Iran's nuclear program with other issues including defensive issues. Moscow has stood by Tehran while Trump has refused to recertify the nuclear deal between Iran and world powers, including Russia. The other parties to the accord, Britain, China, France, Germany and the European Union, have also urged Trump to stay in the deal. The U.S. Congress now will make a decision regarding the 2015 nuclear deal, in which Iran agreed to limit its enrichment of uranium in exchange for the lifting of economic sanctions. In recent days, lawmakers have targeted Iran with new sanctions over its ballistic missile program, which wasn't included in the deal, but which American officials say violates the spirit of the accord. Khamenei praised Putin's strong character. Because of this reason, it is possible to have logical dialogue and cooperation with Russia as a big power about big jobs that require determination and effort, the Supreme Leader said. Russia and Iran have a complicated history. Many still remember how Russia, alongside Britain, invaded and occupied Iran during World War II to secure oil fields and allied supply lines. But while Britain withdrew, Russia refused to leave, sparking the first international rebuke by the nascent UN Security Council in 1946. During the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, Iran allowed refugees into the country and backed Mujahideen rebel fighters, as did the US and Saudi Arabia. While Gulf Arab states sought the protection of the US after the 1991 Gulf War, Iran tilted toward Russia. Russia has supplied surface-to-air missiles to Iran, and helped it to build its first nuclear power plant, in the southern port city of Bushehr, which went online in 2011. The two countries are now partnering in the construction of 2 more nuclear reactors at the site. Russia and Iran have both provided crucial support to President Bashar al-Assad's forces in the Syrian civil war, something Rouhani praised during his meeting with Putin. Iranian and Russian cooperation has had a great impact in fighting terrorism in the region, Rouhani said, according to a statement from his office. The joint cooperation and consultations are very important in the final stages too. Iran allowed Russia access to its air bases last year to bomb targets in Syria. But that struck a nerve in Iran, whose constitution bars foreign militaries from having bases in the country. Russia has reached out to Saudi Arabia in recent weeks, promising weapons systems and other investments to the ultra-conservative Sunni kingdom. That too has raised eyebrows in Shiite Iran, which is the kingdom's Mideast rival. Prior to Putin's arrival on his 3rd trip to Iran, Russia's armed forces chief, General Valery Gerasimov, met with his Iranian counterpart, General Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, and discussed defense and security issues, Iranian state television reported on Wednesday, without elaborating.